Hey everybody, and welcome to another video in the App from Scratch series for iOS. In this video, we'll be adding a new view controller in order to add locations to our example rock climbing app. I'll be showing you one of the ways to share data between different view controllers, namely the ability to add data in one view and have that data be updated in the parent view. So let's get started. As a review, I'm going to show you just what we have here as our current application from the last video, and it's just a table view with a navigation controller at the top here. So when we click on this, which comes from our core data, and this is going to be our rock climbing location, namely a crag, I'm going to click into that, and it's going to show us a map with the current user view, and I have my location in the debug set to a freeway drive. So it's going to center in on the location for the user, and then it's going to just drive down this freeway. So that's what we currently have. Of course, because we have the navigation controller, we have the automatic back button here that gets propagated. But this data here is entered in from our last video, some just example code to get this working. So I create a new crag object. This is going to be a core data object, and we're going to add some values to it, another crag location, which is what that is showing here on the right hand side, and then our latitude and longitude that we just made up. And then, of course, we save that to the database, and every time we launch that application, it would write a new entry. So I commented that out, but again, we want to be able to add in our own data via another view. Now, the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to add in a plus button at the top right-hand corner, and then create a new view controller that allows us to enter in all of this data via just regular fields, and then we'll be able to add that to core data via an interface rather than doing it this way. So let's get started doing that. The first thing I want to do is hook up a plus button here. This is just going to be a quick way of doing that. So if you remember from our last video, we have the two view controllers. This is the details view controller for our crag here on the right, and then this is the one that you're currently seeing. So up in here, this is wrapped in a navigation controller. So we get this little top bar navigation item at the top. And if you click on it, make sure on the left-hand side under this view is the navigation item. And then I can go up to this plus button here in the top right-hand corner, or Command-Shift-L, which is a little bit faster, and type in button. Now, buttons are usually, this is the button we usually use, but because we're using a navigation item, we want to use a bar button item to go within that navigation item. Now we also have a couple of other bar button items, including a fixed space bar button item and a flexible space bar button item. And those two are going to be different ways of spacing out and kind of organizing buttons when they're either in a navigation item, or most useful is in a toolbar. Now, toolbars have multiple items, multiple buttons that you can press, etc. And we might want to space those out a little bit differently. Maybe put two on the left, one on the right. So we might use a flexible spacing to kind of make that space as big as possible and just kind of slide one over to the right, etc. We won't be covering that in this video, but if you ever needed to do that, that's mostly useful in a toolbar item, because in our navigation item, we can put one up here on the right. This always spins on me for some reason. All right, and then when that stops spinning, after a good 30 seconds for this time, usually it doesn't last that long, we can also put it over here on the right or on the left. So left, right. So this is currently called item, but that's okay. We're going to go over here on our right-hand side under our inspector for the attributes. And if that's not open, of course, open it on the right-hand side here. And under system item, under custom, we are able to add in icons and functionality that the users are used to. So add, edit, done, etc. So if you want to look at what edit looks like, that one just says edit. Add is going to be a plus. And we have a whole bunch of other ones like trash, which obviously looks like a trash can, etc., etc. So if you're trying to add items up here that do a particular thing, try not to spell it out. Try to use icons that users are familiar with. So play, etc. But do not use play for any other purpose. That is one reason that Apple might reject your application, is reusing these, abusing the interface guidelines, let's say. All right, so once we have that set up, I'm going to go ahead and hit this button here at the top right-hand corner that looks like a plus, so that we can have both our code side by side with our UI. Give that a second. I'm going to expand this out. And of course, in this version of Xcode, it loses the view controller that I currently had over here. So I'm just going to go ahead and simply just click on the item that I had before. It'll go ahead and select that and center it for you. And then over here, we're going to hit this 4-corner thing, go down to automatic, and make sure that something in this view controller is selected so that the automatic selection knows where to find this. Now this is our default view controller that is created when the application or the project is created. So it has a generic name of view controller, but that's what the root view controller is named. So let me expand this out just a little bit more so you can see it. All right, so basically we're going to duplicate this entry code, but I want to be able to add in a view controller when this is pressed. So I'm going to kind of scroll down underneath our override functions, kind of keep all of my overridden functions at the top, and then here is where our table view delegate methods are and data source methods. So I'm going to kind of just put it right in between, make plenty of space. White space is free, so let's go ahead and utilize it. And now that we have some space here, I am going to hold down the control key, click and drag, and just add in a new function or an action, just like we do for anything else. So action view controller, we're going to name this add crag, and I like to just say tapped to let the programmer, somebody else is working on the project, to know that this is going to be an action that takes place when that's tapped. Let's go ahead and hit enter on that. And of course, make a little bit of room here so that we can start typing in our code. Okay, so what happens when we hit this add button? Well, we want to go ahead and slide in a new view controller. So the way that we do that is we ask the navigation controller and say navigation controller. So just type in navigation. There's 2 items here, navigation item and navigation controller. We want the navigation controller, lowercase n on that, because this is going to be the same thing as if we typed self dot navigation controller. Every view controller has a reference to its parent navigation controller. Sometimes it's nil, so we'll want to go ahead and check for that. But the next thing I want to do is on the navigation controller, I want to be able to push a new view controller onto the stack so that it slides in from the right and goes onto the stack and allows us to have that back button. Again, we did that in the previous video. So I'm going to push a view controller. I'm just going to hit enter on this. Now we do not currently have a view controller in order to push it onto the stack, so let's go ahead and create that now. I think I'll just put it on the side here, so Command-Shift-L and type in view controller. And I think this was selected on the left, or on the right, so make sure on the left is selected. Try that again. There we go. Click and drag and drop that in. Kind of align it there is fine. All right, and I'm just going to test this out. I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole and make sure everything is working first. So click and drag. Okay, do something like that, and just kind of center and put it near the top. All right, hit save. Okay, so just like we did in the last video, I'm going to go ahead and select this view controller, make sure it's selected. You can also select it here on the left hand side if you want to. Go over to its attributes, go over to the class kind of view here. We're going to give it a storyboard ID. So this one is going to be called add new crag. I'm actually going to call this one modify crag, or you can call it edit, but the purpose of this one is going to be to either add data, or if we want to edit that data, to be able to reuse that view and edit that same data. And it would look very similar to adding the data, except we would pre-fill that data in and just allow the user to change it if we wanted to. If there was a typo, it would basically be that text box. So we edit the text, we hit save. So I'm not going to call it add view controller because it's going to actually do both. So it's going to be called modify crag, and then all of our classes end in view controller, so make sure you do that. Now, once this restoration, or excuse me, not the restoration, the storyboard ID is filled in, now we can instantiate a new version of that view controller. Let me go ahead and hit Command Option 0 to hide that right bar. And I'm going to say let crag view controller. And I'm going to set that equal to, again, we're instantiating a version or an of this view, and I'm going to ask the storyboard to do that for me. And again, view controllers have references to the storyboard that it lives in. So we can say storyboard instantiate, and we have a few options here, but really the only one that we want is with identifier. All right, and this is going to give us back a view controller. So it's asking for the identifier. Now the identifier is, we can type in as a string here, but if I ever wanted to change that modify crag view controller, then this wouldn't work because when I do the refactor, it won't refactor the string, the application will crash. And so I never put in string literals. If you've ever seen any of my previous videos, it's the same thing. And the other thing is we don't actually have a view controller with that class yet. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create that class. So I'm going to go over here on the right hand side. You can go click on the bottom left hand side of your Xcode application and go to new file, or you can do that from file new and add a new file. Cocoa Touch class is what we want, and we're basically just going to paste this in. However, actually I'm just going to spell it out. Everything needs to end in view controller. That subclass is the UI view controller. It's not strictly necessary, but you'll get a lot of benefit by doing that. Plus, Xcode these days will autofill that in. Subclass of UI view controller, and we don't want to create a zip file for that. That's the old way of doing it. Yeah, I guess people still use it these days. And we're going to make sure that's going to get dumped into our project file with all the rest of the source code files. All right, so now that we have an instance of that, we're going to go back to our storyboard. And we're going to set this class, so make sure this is selected, or you can select it on the left. And this already has the storyboard ID, but now we can fill in the class. And if I just type in M for modify, it'll autocomplete it. Now, if that doesn't autocomplete, then you've done something wrong. Either it's not a subclass of UI view controller or some other reason. And make sure that this checkbox is checked. Older versions of Xcode didn't used to check that automatically, so you always want to make sure that's checked. But today it looks like everything is automatic and checked for you. This is just going to make sure that this class is in this module. All right, so now that we have this class, instead of hard coding this in, I am going to use the string class and instantiate a string, and I'm going to use the initializer that is going to be the describing. And for describing, I'm going to type in that class name and dot self. And this is going to return a type. And the type is modify crag view controller. It's going to pass that into the string class and then create a string based on that type. And so this is a fancy way of just putting in exactly what I typed in between the double quotation marks. But when I do a refactor and I want to change the name of this class, then it'll go ahead and change the name of this and it'll just work. All right, so we have a couple more errors. Let's go ahead and take care of those before. So we have a lot of unwrapping to do and things like that. So this is going to come back. Let me make a little bit of room so it's not all jumped up in my... Let's actually switch over. Let us close this view on the right hand side, switch over to the left. So this is our view controller. So I'm just going to select our view controller. So we'll take up the full screen here, scroll down to where that was. All right, so here we go. All right, so in instantiating our view controller, we want to actually pass that back as a view controller to pass in. So this is going to be our crag, or excuse me, our modify crag view controller. So this is going to be typecast as what gets returned from this instantiate view controller as a crag, or excuse me, again, modify crag view controller. Make sure that's right. We'll get one more warning coming up here in a second, and that's because what we're doing is this is coming back as an optional, and I explained this in previous videos, but I just want to make sure that we're covering this appropriately. So this is coming back as a view controller. So what it's going to say is, if we open this up, is we have to unwrap that because it is not compatible. The UI view controller optional, this little question mark, is not compatible with modify crag view controller that we're trying to cast it as. So it's going to say, go ahead and unwrap that. Now, if we mistyped in the storyboard ID, then that storyboard view controller is not going to be able to instantiate that view controller. So again, just a lengthy way of saying that we need to make sure that this is going to be a modified Crag view controller. So that's what all that fancy stuff is. Let's go ahead and check these warnings. All right, so it just says that we're not using this variable, which is fine because I'm going to use it right here. So I copied, pasted that in, and then do we want to animate that? Yes, we do. So say true. And that's going to push that onto the stack and animate that sliding across the screen. And that's pretty much all we have to do for this. Now this is currently, we're going to be adding data to it. Now if we wanted to modify the data, then we might actually pass in either a flag or some other piece of data into this view controller so that it knows it has to go and get that data to modify. In other words, if we were going over to edit this and we clicked on it or we said modify, then it would show that same modify view controller, that modify Crag view controller, but put in the data. All right, so let's go ahead and get that done. So our Crag view controller, let's just make sure that works. So I'm gonna go ahead and compile it. All right, and because we're testing, we're just gonna say allow once to use our location. And now we have the plus button, so we're gonna tap on that. It slides over a new Crag modify view controller. Great, that's awesome. Let's hit back. Let's do that a few times just to test it. All right, nothing fancy, but now we're going to go ahead in this view, add some text views, put in the data, hook that data up, create an object when we hit save, and then pass that back to our database controller, and then we can refresh this parent view so that we can see the new line. All right, so we're gonna, again, add data here. When we hit back or save, namely save, we're going to see the new item there. If you actually, the proper UI behavior for this, by the way, is if I'm filling out information in here and I hit back, that's kind of the same as hitting cancel. So if you want to double make sure that the user intends to do that, maybe it will pop up a message saying, hey, you filled out information, do you really want to cancel and go back? Or sometimes people will use that back button to save the data, but that's not necessarily what the human interface guidelines say. All right, let's get this done. Let's go to the main. You can go through this pretty quickly. I have other videos that cover this, so delete that. I'm just going to click on the view controller, hit Command T to open up a new tab, slide over to the main tab, and that way I could just go back and forth between these two tabs here at the top because I want to take note of what we actually want to add. So namely the Crag name, notes, and then a location. We're going to fill this in manually. There are ways to do adding the location by either the current location or a map. And if you want to see that in the future video, feel free to put that in the comments or join our Discord channel and ask all the questions you want about this stuff. But anyway, so, oops, that's not where I want to do. I'm going to hit the back button here. All right, so we need a name, maybe some notes. And so I'm going to hit Command Shift L and say text field or text F. And I'm going to drag these in. And then for the notes, that might be a little bit longer. So if you go to like a rock climbing area, you might want to give some description about that. This is going to be a text view, so text V, or I can just type in text. But so that's going to be a little bit bigger. And then the location, I'm just going to use these text fields for now. So I'm going to Option, click and hold and drag that down. Hold down Option, click and drag, and that just copies that present one there. I'm going to resize these to be roughly where I want them using our margins. I'm going to click and drag up to select these two, drag them down, kind of expand this out. There we go. And then Command Shift L again, and then I'm going to put in a label. Click and drag over. Line that up, Option, click and drag down, and put that right there at the top, enough spacing. And Xcode does a really good job of telling you what the spacing should be. So the vertical spacing, and then I'm going to drag this down for the bottom spacing, or the top and bottom spacing, I should say. All right, real quick, so this is going to be Crag name. We'll fix that in a second. Name these whatever you want. I'm just going to be kind of quick here. So latitude for our more seasoned developers. Just probably all the same. All right, so what we're going to do real quick, set up our constraints. Going to click and drag up top space to safe area. Hold down, actually we'll just do that one. Control drag over and then hold down shift, leading and trailing. And for our text view, drag up vertical spacing, control click over, hold down shift, leading and trailing. Oops, and sometimes when you do them out of order, I always do that. Delete this. So hold your mouse over until it highlights, then click. Don't try to click before. So just delete on that one. And then, why is it not letting me grab that? Okay, it just didn't change my icon. Drag that over, and let's redo that constraint. That's a little bug in Xcode, I guess. Should give me a different cursor. Anyway, let's go ahead and do these. So vertical space, leading and trailing. Usually I do the leading and trailing first. That's why it kind of made it as small as possible. Then do the vertical. So leading and trailing. And that will, I'll show you in a second here, but that will prevent it from resizing. So let me do the vertical real quick. So it's going to be a little bit extra space there. All right, so if I was to do the vertical here first and then do the horizontal leading and trailing, it would make this text box really small like you saw here. So again, to avoid that, do leading and trailing first, set that up, then do the vertical. All right, we have one issue here. I'll get to that in a second. Always look at the red marks, and I forgot to do trailing there. There's some constraint that's currently off. So that's why it's red. Oh, okay, so this one doesn't have a height. That's why. Everyone else, these heights are automatic. If you wanted to have a bigger height or a lesser height, you'd have to set that explicitly, but it'll just use the default, except for the text views here. So we have to explicitly set the height. I'm going to go down to the right-hand side, click on this, and set the height to 128. It's a nice number, base 8 number. Add constraint, and so now you can see this extra constraint here on the right-hand side. And that's just going to say that that height is always going to be 128. Now, all of our other constraints below that rely on those vertical spacings will, those will be correct now. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and rerun this just to double check the constraints and everything looks right. And then I'll show you one more thing about adding in input. So allow once, hit the plus key, everything looks good. I can rotate it to the right, and we turned off rotation, I believe, so everything looks good, but just want to double check that. All right, so when I click into this text field, and of course this simulator is semi-new, so it pops that up, you can see our keyboard. All right, so crag name, we can type it in here. We can use the physical keyboard on our desk here if we wanted to. But for the latitude, you can't just say, I don't know, you can't type in a latitude with letters. And the other thing is you can't, well, you have to go over to numbers, etc. And I also don't want the spell check, right? Sometimes, a lot of the time, it doesn't work correctly. So I'll show you how to fix that here. Let's go back to Xcode. So this is correct here. This is the one we want. We don't want a full keyboard on that one. Let's go ahead and open up this view. I'll show you how to change this if you're not familiar. So over here in our attributes tab for our inspector, go down to text input traits, and the content type, if your content follows one of these items, then go ahead and fill this in, because Xcode/iOS will try to auto-fill in what the information it is if it knows it. For example, on a phone, the phone knows what its phone number is, and so it can actually type this in. Or if you're typing in a number, iOS could potentially guess what that phone number is. Same thing with email, URLs, credit card numbers, etc. if it has that information. And as you know, iOS has a lot of information about you. So this will save your user a lot of time and effort in inputting this. Now, none of our information passes that up, but I did want to call that out. Capitalization, well, crag names usually are capitalized, so we'll capitalize words because these are usually proper nouns. So each word will get capitalized. Correction, no, because these crags might have really funny names and we don't want to correct that for the user. And there's a bunch of other things that we can do as well. Keyboard type is kind of what I want to call out here. ASCII capable is going to be the one that we want to use. But if any of these fall into the data that you're trying to enter, select this because, again, we'll show a different keyboard for that. So let's go ahead and do the latitude. Under keyboard type, we're going to just do the number pad. But we want to use the decimal pad because latitude, longitude have decimals in it. So we can do both of those. And we don't necessarily need to worry about the correction because with the number pad, it doesn't try to connect it or correct it, excuse me. All right, we have one more issue that we need to solve. Actually, two more. I want to get rid of this example text. So I'm just going to highlight and delete it. And I also want to be able to add in / recognize any phone numbers, links, or addresses. And of course, we have all these other options as well. But if a phone number shows up within these crag nodes, it'll become clickable by the user. The other thing I want to do, so then we have link. And again, if there's a web URL link, we'll be able to select it. And then also with address, we'll be able to select it. And this will allow us to put in something like, hey, if you need access to this crag, call this number. Or if you have any complaints, send a letter to this address. Or for more information, click on this website to get more information or whatever, right? So we have the ability to add in tappable pieces of information that, depending upon what it is, if it's a phone number and it's on a phone, it'll try to call it. And this happens automatically. We don't have to add any more information for this. So this is really useful. So do take a look at all these different options. I mean, it's just a text view, but look at all these options that we have. And these are just the ones that are built into the UI. We have way more functionality programmatically. So anyway, just wanted to do that. And then also right now, if I left this blank, it would, you wouldn't be able to see it. It would show up as a big white area, kind of like this. So nobody would know that it's there. A couple ways that we can fix that. We can change the border style, or what I sometimes like to do is go down to the background, and we can go scroll all the way down, go to custom, and give it a slight kind of a grayish, maybe a little bit more slight than that. Not too much, but also we're using kind of the default design here. So really what you want to do is come up with a better design. We can put borders on these. We can put in some example text here. So for the text label here, for example, we can go up to placeholder and just say, crag name. And that'll show up in a light gray that you've probably seen. Or we can just do like an example, and I don't know what a crag name off the top of my head would be, but let's say Gully's Gullet, something like that. Again, these have really silly names. So there you go. And we can do the same thing with latitude, longitude. If you can avoid it, never allow the user to type in sensitive information like this, mainly numbers that they could either mistype or just not put in the exact format that you need. So come up with another way that we put in latitude. Again, there's several ways. I can do it in a future video where we get the user's current location, or we pop up a map and they can set it via the map, or we can put in an address. So if you're needing to do this, let me know and I'll create a video specifically for your needs. But for right now, we're just going to skip over that advanced functionality. If we have time later on, we'll do it, but not in this video. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is, this is going to be part of a navigation controller. And so let me show you how we might go about doing this. So I'm going to add in a bar button item. And I'm going to try to drag it up here to the top, but it's not going to work. Actually, I don't even know where that went. Oh, there it went. It created a toolbar at the bottom. So I'm going to just undo that because that's not what we wanted to do. This one's going to have a navigation bar at the top. And if I try to resize this here, then I have to put up in a whole bunch of constraints, and this is just kind of messy this way. So I'm going to set these programmatically. So you could do it in the UI if you wanted to. You could wrap it in a navigation controller, whatever you want, in order to be able to drag that button in that says save here. But again, I'm going to put that in programmatically. So again, this view or this view controller is called modify Crag view controller. We're going to go ahead and switch over to that. Now when our view did load, this is a great place to put that. And I'm going to say navigation, and instead of the navigation controller, it's going to be the navigation item. You saw me kind of drag that in and resize that, but I want to set the right bar button item. So you can see we have two options when I do right, and we can also set the left, but that's where our back button's going to be. So we can either pass in an array, which is the second one here, and give it a whole bunch of bar button items to put on the right hand side, or just one. So we're just going to do one here. And if I hit escape after that, we're just going to double check the type. It is a UR bar button item. So we're going to need to instantiate a UR bar button item. And for the initializer, we have a few options. This is the one we're going to want to use. We're going to give it a system item, namely save, give it a target, and then a selector. So who is it going? What class is it going to act on? And then inside of that class, what's the selector or method that's going to get called when this button does it? So this is the same thing as control clicking and dragging from the UI to our code and hooking it up this way. But again, this is programmatic and gives you a lot more flexibility. So this is looking for a bar button item dot system item. I can just hit dot and it'll give me all the bar button items. The system items that we can do. And so I'm going to scroll down till we say save. There it is. Okay, then it'll be a save button. Okay, I'm just going to click on that. For some reason it wasn't selecting. And just hit self. So the target's going to be this particular class that we're currently in, namely the modified Crag view controller. Okay, so selector, pound, selector. Now, before I put in a name there, I always like to define it first. And that way it'll auto-complete the signature that we're going to put in that selector. So I'm going to ignore that error for right now. Go down here. We're going to start this off with an Objective-C because we're going to expose this to the Objective-C runtime. And we're going to say, I'm just going to say, func for function, save, tapped, and then sender. And this is going to be this is actually going to be a UI bar button item. So this is the button that actually sent me this notification, or this the selector, called the selector, I should say. All right, we'll leave that for right now. Now that we have this signature, again, Objective-C, expose this to the Objective-C runtime so that this selector can look up that function name. And I'm going to say saved, and see how it says sender : within the signature. Sometimes I get that right, sometimes I misspell it. But if I define the function first, Xcode will automatically fill that in for me. So that's why I did that. All right, so what we need to do now in this saved tab is grab all the information out of the UI text view, the field, and whatever other fields that we have in there, and then construct a Crag item. So I'm going to say Crag, let Crag, let's say call it new Crag. And why not? Let's just go up to our view controller. Since we don't need this and we'd likely delete it anyway, we'll cut it out here and paste it in here. Highlight that, command // and then command square bracket to the left. There we go, to unindent that. Okay, it's going to have a problem with our context because we don't actually have the context for our view control, or excuse me, our data controller. So the last video we did this, but I'm going to say let context equals database controller dot let's see, persistent container dot view context. And that just gives us a local copy. We could put this entire line here, but we'll just keep it clean, and so you can follow along. All right, so then we're going to replace this information with the fields that the data that we get out of the fields, but we don't have that yet. So let's go over to our main view controller, Command-Shift-Y to get rid of that debug window at the bottom, and we're going to split this view, and we're going to get this from our modify view controller, modify Crag view controller. All right, so we need instances of these text views before we can pull out their information. Control drag in. This one's going to be called crag name text field. I have 3 more text fields, 2 more text fields to do. So I'm going to copy text field. Make sure you're dragging it between the outlets and the function. This one's going to be called latitude paste text field. Let me give this some space. Sometimes if you don't give it space, Xcode will think you're trying to hook it up to another view controller or another text field in your view controller. This one's going to be called longitude text field. And just double check I put the decimal pad on there. All right, and then finally we'll get this one, and this is going to be called crag notes text view. You can always tell what type it is by this little type field here. Hit connect or hit enter. Clean this up just a hair, and let's close this so you can see it all in one line. Okay, no big deal. So UI text fields, basically I'm just going to copy all these because I hate typing. Paste these in here, and then grab these, paste, paste, paste. And where are the notes? Where are the notes? There they are. And then delete all the other junk. Sometimes how I do those things. Still not done because we got to do text out of those text fields. Copy, paste, paste, paste. All right, so that went pretty quickly. All right, so this one, oh yeah, force unwrap this guy. Yeah, we should probably check for nil. So let's go ahead and actually do that because we want to do it the proper way. So if let context is equal to this guy and that assignment is valid, everything under it should get saved. And we'll indent that in there left. So basically what we're doing is we hit Command 0, get a little bit more room. So what we're basically saying is on this guy, do this assignment, get the view context, but for some reason if that context for the core data managed object context is nil, then we don't fall within this. So this is just a nice protection. Anytime you're putting a exclamation point on your variables, you should be questioning why you're doing that and maybe even wrap it in an if-let statement such as this. So sometimes you'll just see me put the exclamation part because I'm trying to hurry through this, but yeah, we don't really have the luxury of this. So right now, this is going to say we're pulling out a string. Now, I ensured that the only way the user can enter data into this field is with a decimal pad. However, we actually are not preventing them from pasting in data that is on their clipboard. So this could actually be a string. It could be anything. So do be careful of this, but we're going to just typecast this into a double. And if it is a number, it'll work. And if it's not a number, it won't work. So we might have to do a little bit of sanitation on our data there. All right, not just as I said that, just as I said, putting an exclamation point, you should question this. So this guy comes back, by the way, if we hit escape on this text, you can see it comes back as an optional. So we would actually want to, it's okay to pass it in to most constructors as an optional, and if it is nil, it just handles it, no big deal. However, for this one, what's going to happen is it's actually asking, this is a really weird way of saying this, but because of this string optional, that it's going to cause issues trying to make a string optional into a double. So we're going to unwrap that. We're going to force unwrap it. Again, we might want to sanitize and just make sure that the text field is not empty, not nil. We could do that way, and then also unwrap this one as well. However, when let's see if I can find it here. If I hit escape on this constructor, see maybe inside the parentheses. Yes, here we go. If I go down somewhere here, so it will accept text using any string that adheres to the string protocol, but it comes back as a double. So, or excuse me, it comes back as a optional double. You can see that with the question mark. So when this comes back, it comes back as a optional, and this latitude object, if I escape on it, is just a regular double. So it can't assign an optional to a non-optional, so I have to unwrap that as well. Again, very dangerous, because if any of those objects are nil, then the application will crash. However, if the text field is empty, that doesn't mean it's nil. So do keep that in mind. But sometimes this will come back as nil, especially if the text field is not hooked up appropriately. All right, and I think that's pretty much all we have to do. Now I'm going to debug this. So I'm going to put a breakpoint on line 30 by clicking on the gutter, and maybe on line 40, just so if I do this enough times, I can just skip through whatever. And maybe even 32, who knows. You don't necessarily need that, but I'm going to go ahead and run this. Switch over to our simulator. All right, allow once because we're debugging. Hit plus, and gives up our keyboard. If you don't see this keyboard, you can go up to, I believe, hardware, keyboard, and then connect hardware keyboard or toggle software keyboard. We can also do Command K to show and hide that. And if we don't connect the hardware keyboard, that's my physical keyboard that I have in front of me, then when I type on that keyboard, it won't work. So again, this is just for debugging purposes. But anyway, let's we'll just type in Billy's Gullet 2, some notes about the crag would go here. Now there's a huge issue that I haven't addressed yet, is I kind of put this way down here. So when I switch over to my latitude, you can see that this is getting cut off. I'll fix that in a second, but I don't know what a good latitude is. Let's say 46, 120, and now certainly on shorter screens this will totally get cut off and I can't scroll up. But I'm gonna hit save. That'll execute into our save. Actually, I should have tested this way before, but that's because this target / action that we have on our right button will get basically call this guy. So anyway, we're now in this function. We're going to go down here and say step over line 30. You can see where it currently has stopped the execution using this blue kind of marker. And my stack traces over here on the left-hand side of how it got here. And basically went through a whole bunch of system stuff to get here, none of our code. So I'm going to step over line 30, and you can hover over this and see that, yes, indeed, this is not nil. And it actually has some value in it. We're not going to look at it. Right now, crag is nil because I haven't instantiated it yet. So when I step over that, you can see that it should have an address. Yep, there we go. We can print it out if we want to. You can see crag location, name, notes are nil. It's all good. So name now, if we hover over new crag, hit the eye, you can see that crag name now has a value, namely the one that we filled in the text field. So everything's working. And I always run through this because what you think is happening might not be what's happening. So always run and debug your code, even if everything looks correct. Because I almost thought I saw something in the location how I was using it, but we already tested that out in the previous one. So I'm just going to go through here. Now, crag location, I just instantiated a new blank location. Oops, I should do the I. And see now the crag location is a bunch of just core data stuff. It's basically the GUID that is for core data for that object. It's not very interesting. But when we go down to the latitude and longitude, and we hover over this, still nothing. So we'd actually have to investigate the crag location. If we go to new crag, but we can't actually get there. So again, I think I mentioned this in the previous video, core data managed objects are kind of, you can't dive down too deeply into them because they're kind of obfuscated a little bit. And then finally, we're going to save this object that we just created that's on our managed object context. We're going to persist that down to the persistent store coordinator and save that to basically to disk. Oh, and I forgot to do one thing. So what you'd want to do is nothing's going to happen on our UI. I'm going to go ahead and hit continue to finish executing our code. So nothing happens. Our our view here is, it's blinking. Looks like we can do some stuff on here. And even though I hit save a bunch of times, nothing's happening. Before I forget, I'm going to say navigation controller, pop view controller animated. Okay, so we have that option. This will basically take the view controller and pop it off the stack, which essentially is the same thing as hitting back. Now we have another issue. If we hit back on this, it has persisted to disk, but we don't see the update here. However, if we reload this application, basically quit it and come back, we see that this is now in there and doesn't have any information because we didn't fill this out yet, but you can see that that's there. So we want to fix that. We want to be able to say when this comes back into view to go and grab these objects that are in their database. So we have to go back to our view controller, and again, this is happening from our last video. We set this up. This is happening in our view did load. So this only gets called once during the life cycle of our view controller. And what we're doing is we're getting a local version of our context, and we're doing a fetch on that. And so this will only ever happen once. Now, I also mentioned in our previous video that we have a view did appear. So that happens when every time the view comes up. So what I'm going to do is actually refactor this. I'm going to highlight this. My right click doesn't seem to work, so control click on this. Go down to refactor. So highlight the code that you want to refactor. And I'm going to extract this out to its own method. Now I could just cut it out, redefine a function, and type that function in, and then take that function, type it in here, but this is going to be way faster. So extract method, and you can see that it took the code that I highlighted, and it replaced it with a function, a call to that function, and now I can just start typing. This is going to be called fetch crag results. Hit enter, and you'll notice a few things. One, it put it way at the top, which is fine, but it also prepended this with file private. Now this function can only get called by any other methods within this file, namely this Swift file that we have, so the view controller.swift. That's what file private means. So if anybody inherits or subclasses the view controller, this guy here, they won't get access to this file. So I think there's 6 different file levels, privacy levels. I'm gonna actually put this down here a little bit. All right, so we're getting the context. We're fetching those results, and then we're storing the fetch results in our array that we have defined as a class member up here, and that's fine. However, when we come back to the view, and actually now that I mentioned that, I should put that not in the view did load, but in the view did appear. Because the view did appear will also get called when it first gets instantiated and loaded, and then also when we come back. So this will get called. Let me put a breakpoint there just to show you that. So this will get called. Now this will get called, but nobody is telling our table view that the data was updated. So in our fetched crag results at the bottom here, I'm going to tell the table view, which we don't have a reference to. Okay, let's remedy that. So I can't tell it to do anything if I don't have a reference to it. So table view, scroll down, paste that in here. Hey, table view, reload the data. Okay, and if you remember from my last video, basically it'll take those fetch results, see how many are in there, and reload the data with that. So every time you call reload data, it'll update your table view manually. Now, do be careful of this, because what'll happen is if this it's very inefficient to call this over and over and over again every time either the view shows up on the screen or whatever. So you might want to put a check in here to see whatever. Just think about that in terms of efficiency and if you really need to call that every time. In our case, it's okay. All right, so yeah, we're good to go. So now when we add in a new crag on our second view controller, when we pop back into this, view did load will get called. This will get called. I'll also put a breakpoint here, and it'll fall in here and basically just grab those from the database and reload the table. Now this is not ideal in a second way because every time we load from the database, that's a pretty expensive operation. And we don't need to recall all the data again because we know the data that we just entered, like we know what that is, so we can just add it to those results. But that's going to require a refactor. That's going to be in probably the next video, and we'll handle that. But anyway, enough talking. Let's run this and finish this up. Okay, so the view did appear. We're going to fall into. Now instead of stepping over, I'm going to step into. If I didn't have that breakpoint here, leave step over. I'm going to drag that breakpoint off to erase it. Step over, step over, step over, step over. We're going to reload the data, the table view. That's fine. I'm going to hit continue. So now we have two. That's still working. That's great. Allow once. So we still have those two objects. Now I'm going to do another object. So I don't know, Mike's Mountain. They like to use alliteration. Okay. I forgot to fix this latitude here. We'll fix that probably in a later video because that's a little bit more complicated. I don't want to make this any longer than it needs to be. Put in some latitudes. Hit save. Now we did fix that where it's going to save the object. I'm going to hit play or continue, go down to our save context. Now our navigation should pop back off. Let me expand that so you can see it. There you go. So it dismissed it from the right. We go back here. You still see two. However, now view did appear because it had appeared again. Is going to call this method on line 28. We're going to step into that by hitting this down arrow here in the debug window. It's going to fall into this function. I'm going to step over, step over, step over. I'm going to kind of look at our results here once we step over that one more time. Hover over. If you don't see it, maybe click in there or just go to self. Sometimes it doesn't pop up. And we have three values. Okay, so I know everything's working so that when I hit reload, we should see this table update. Continue. And there it is. Perfect. So that is one way of adding data from another view controller back to your parent view controller, updating that core data table view, and getting those results from the table view. So I hope this was useful for you. In the next video, we will continue developing this application out, making it more complex. And actually, I'm going to do a lot of refactoring on this because this is not necessarily the best way of doing it. So I'll show you the better way. But in case you just wanted a quick and dirty way of doing it, now you have it. If you want to see any other ideas or anything else that's implemented for this application, feel free to leave a comment down below or join our Discord channel. So our Discord server has a bunch of channels for iOS, Android, 3D, and game development. We've been running it for a few months now. It's been very helpful for a lot of users. I've learned a lot from you guys. You guys bring up a lot of questions that I either need to go research or that I just don't know anything about. And other people on that server know something about. So it's a great place to kind of communicate, show off your applications that you're working on, get some help, get questions answered, etc. So hopefully see you over there. I'll put the link for that channel in there. Everything is free, so don't worry about that. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Hit the little bell so you get notified of the next video. And don't worry, Android people, if you're ever watching this, I will be making this application for Android as well. And for those who want to learn Android, we're also starting up a new course in January, which is in a few weeks, to show you how to do Android development. So stick around for that. Hopefully I'll hear from you in the Discord server, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.